they're pushing down on the gas, and training performance is dropping. So what goes in when you have nothing left option-wise to retain tissue is more drugs. A drug thing on prep, just so now everyone is eyes big, they're all tuned in. Drugs.
After 50 minutes, we got to talk about drugs.
What, some people have given me like argument back because I say like I use the peak amount of like dosing in the off season versus in prep. In prep, my dosing's lower. Now, I would say within the composition of that, there could be like harsher compounds present. But I think where we see, like with a lot of people in all these issues we're talking about with prep, is them having to get in suboptimal positions where the timeline's fast, they're pushing down on the gas, and training performance is dropping. So what goes in when you have nothing left option-wise to retain tissue is more drugs. And you see trend. More trend, more halo, right? Yeah. The anadrol load is present, full bore. So it's now
16 weeks out.
The total drug load's high now in a prep, which I think a lot of this has just been passed down protocols of, I still see them like, hey, 8 weeks out, I'm thinking about adding in X, Y, Z. It's like, well, why? Well, I don't know. That's just what you add in at that time. And that's how I was taught. Like, hey, like 12 weeks in, Tring goes in. 6 weeks out, Winnie goes in. 3 weeks out, Halo goes in. Why? I don't know. That's just what I was told. At some point, like, that's just what happens. But I was like, well, how do you assess when these things should be going in? And I think we talked about this on our last podcast, I believe. But what do steroids do? And it's muscle retention, muscle growth. So how do we like assess that? It's like your best proxy is going to be training performance. Mm-hmm. So this should be your guide for dosing in a contest prep, or even your off season for that matter. So what I realized a long time ago when I was doing 212 is like, we started a prep, me and Jansen, we had pretty high drug load. I was like recomping, like training performance is going sky high. I'm like, Matt, I don't think I'm going to make weight if we do this. He's like, yeah, you're probably right. He's like, let's cut your drugs in half. So we lowered the dose way down. Yeah. Training performance held. I made weight. So it was just about like, man, you can maintain tissue in a far less drug load. Yeah. Mm-hmm. And so that's how all my preps are situated now, to where I have peak dosing in the off season. It's probably like 75% the total milligram amount in a contest prep. And I think being able to not have to run as much drug as well when you're in positions where you could have sleep get compromised and all these aspects, or GI issues become more even a problem. To Dean, you're like, yes, right. All the main immune system is all compromised in the GI tract. You start seeing more food sensitivities and tolerances forming in someone in prep towards the tail end. And so we're tottling like more drug on top of this kind of brewing storm. You run into a lot of problems. So this is like what people give me so much shit on, like using less drug in a contest prep than the off season, which it is for more probably someone that is in a position where they can have a right timeline and manage fatigue. But I also don't think for someone earlier on that it's a rationale of like, or justification to use more drug just because this is the way I have to prep and it's going to be suboptimal.
I think it's also because you stay leaner in the off season, right? And your off season is really geared towards growth. Whereas a lot of guys, they have to play catch up during contest prep, where they have a 1 month mass phase. I test the nandrolone, and then I gotta get swole again. But they come from a point of TRT, right? You could do like an 8-week clean out phase to get your health parameters in check, ready for contest prep. But some guys would stay off for 6 months, and then they need to blow up a little bit to start their contest prep. Whereas I feel if your dosages stay a little bit more moderate, maybe a little bit higher in the off season to put the size on, and then you taper downwards, or you have different compounds that might be a little bit more anabolic milligram for milligram, and potentiate more of a cosmetic afference. I think that's easier to kind of wave through your entire year than go hard in one end and then take a hard off time and then go hard again during prep. So it seems if you just slowly taper things up, whether that's the diet, training intensity, or the drugs, it seems you have a more pleasant experience. Yeah. But yeah, people still like to go pretty hard on either direction, which is sad. So John, during the off season, what would be the compound selection? We don't have to go into milligrams versus the contest prep. Like, is there a big difference, or
honestly, it hasn't differed that much anymore. I would say like as generality, like you might have I think in prep, if we were differentiate them, like, hey, you had like some test primo off-season growth hormone, that's a pretty good base. Then into prep, you probably see a bit more test mast or primo. And then the more harsh stuff would be like, hey, trenbolone's probably there for some, and then an oral steroid. So like the tren oral steroid piece is where you're seeing like the more harsh compounds come in. And I don't mean like stacking all 4 oral steroids together or some combination, but usually there's like, one, maybe 2 even being present.
Yeah.
So
Yeah, this is the last couple of weeks before prep. Do you guys take the injectables out before stepping on stage, just to prevent any lumps and bumps and that kind of stuff? Or do you run it all the way through because your gear is such good quality that you don't get any lumps and bumps?
Yeah. Do you want me to start this?
Go. Kurt,
sure.
Whoever wants to go first.
Sure. I think this gets into peak week, right? And
yeah.
So with the injection side, we look at it like, okay, during peak week, when should I be pulling certain drugs out to create the aesthetic look? And I think this is where we run the risk of creating a lot of variables you need to manipulate within peak week. So if you're like going into peak week, you're like, well, I'm holding water. Let's say, like, why are you holding water? Like, which avenue is this from? Is it from stress cortisol? Is it from some drug stack you're running? And so I want to try to create, going into peak week, as few variables as I need to, manipulate and hold as many constants as I can for an easy assessment. So the PED side of the equation, I start assessing like 6 weeks out and changing stack design to make sure there's not the water influence once I finally get to peak week. All right. So 6 weeks out is when I'm already starting to play with this testosterone dose. I start testing AIs and seeing how estradiol might influence a look. I also start playing with growth hormone and make some reductions and seeing how that influences look. So by the time I get to peak week, I already have a set amount of like this much testosterone, this much growth hormone, or none. Has this guy in a shape on Monday where I can nearly put him on stage. Not the other way where we have tests and growth hormone all in, and then we'll just use a diuretic to drop off the water, and oops, we still had fat to lose. So this way, I cut the water variable out because I have that adjusted, and then we can see the fat loss continue to trail out from there. But the injection side, now this is where this would come in, is like when to stop injections. Well, I have some guys, and those guys that are very full and round and likely don't get in great condition. Those guys are usually the ones that need just removal of growth hormone or some of the water-driven compounds, testosterone. It's primarily what we're talking about here.
Yeah.
Well, guys like myself, they're the condition guys that get like granite, like, right? Like, man, when I drop testosterone and growth hormone, my look just flattens out. I don't look as hard. So I leave it in all the way through the show. But what you should start assessing, and that's why I say anything you do, assess it. Ask the whys. So after an injection, how long does it take typically for this issue to resolve, or is it a problem, right? It's like, man, I do a shot on my shoulder. It takes me like 5 days for it to feel normal. And then we probably want to add a couple days on just for like, just in case. So that's when you should stop your last injection and just assessing your own compound your response to these injections. But for a lot of guys, hey, if you're on like a longer ester, stopping it even like 5-7 days out is not going to really be a problem, right? Or even if it's like a tren ace you're running, by the time you're in peak week, food's going up, drugs can come down. Like that's the key of like muscle retention is probably more food driven than trenbolone driven. So as a general guide, a week out for stopping injections would be within reason. I usually go 3 days because I'm just familiar with the gear that I use and my response. So that's just the generalities of like starting to assess the look and make gear adjustments far out, and then tailoring that to the individual's need across the spectrum of how much someone needs in for fullness versus condition.
No. Do you have guys that run their injections all the way into the show, or generally at least a couple days before the show where they take it out?
At least a couple days, because man, everyone could have a bad shot gone wrong, even though you've been doing fine. So it's just like, at least give yourself 3 days. Like it's not going to be a big deal if you just have a few less injections. I think people worry potentially if you're doing like shows back to back, and how do you manage that? It's like, well, if I need to cut my shots out 7 days out, Then my next show is 7 days. Then I have another one. Like, do I just not do any injections during that time? And it's like, well, okay, this is a little different situation, and where you probably could leave some in or just restart them, do a few shots, then drop them back out a couple days before. And that's how I've done it for last shows. You bring a little bit back in, pull it back out a few days before. If you have really bad gear, man, solve that problem, right? So that's going to be a real issue for you if you're in a contest prep.
Yeah, you still see it happen though at the highest level, where guys walk on stage with giant lumps. And you're like, what the hell's going on? You're supposed to know a little bit better, but stuff can happen, obviously, even at the highest level, and it's very distracting as the audience. You're like, that's not a muscle. That should not be there. Yeah, so I'd rather play it safe and tell people to cut it at least a couple days before.
Yeah, easily.
And then obviously, the manipulation of the testosterone and the growth hormone is kind of person dependent, because I also know people that keep the growth hormone in while simultaneously lowering their testosterone dose quite a bit, and then remaining a full look. But that comes with the experience, obviously. And that takes time. That takes multiple preps.